Have you ever noticed that what we call reality may not be as solid as we believe? What your eyes capture, what your thoughts describe, what your senses confirm as true, may be only the surface of something infinitely deeper. The world seems reliable, structured, stable. But this confidence is born from invisible filters operating within you, shaping each perception before it even becomes conscious. If every experience is mediated by mental patterns, memories, and expectations, then what we call reality is not exactly what is out there, but an intimate construction, a reflection of the lenses through which we look. And it is precisely here that the great turning point lies, realizing that perhaps we have never seen the real as it is, only the translation our mind makes of it. Today you will be guided into an experience that is not only informative, but transformative. Throughout this video, you will be invited to question certainties that once seemed unshakable, and to place under suspicion even the way your body decodes the world. The promise is clear. If you stay until the end, you will no longer see reality as you did before. Something will shift within you, and this shift has no return. Prepare yourself. This is not an invitation to believe in something new, but to feel the ground beneath your feet change. What begins as doubt will become vision, and that vision will continue to echo long after the video ends. If everything we call reality is mediated by internal filters, we need to look more carefully at how the mind works. Neuroscience has already shown that the brain does not record the world passively. It anticipates, projects, and reconstructs every detail before consciousness even notices. What you see now is not an objective photograph of the space around you, but an interpretation built in fractions of a second. The real arrives at your senses as a torrent of stimuli, but it only becomes world after the brain selects, edits, and organizes it. This process creates a powerful illusion. We believe we see what exists, but in truth, we are seeing a coded version adapted to our survival. Cognitive science calls this predictive modeling. The brain uses past experiences to guess what is before you, filling in gaps in perception with expectations. It is like watching a movie in which some scenes have been cut, yet the narrative continues to flow because the mind builds the missing pieces. This mechanism explains why two people can witness the same event and walk away with completely different accounts. It is not that one of them is lying, but that each one lived in a distinct world, shaped by their memories, fears, and desires. The shared field of stimuli was the same, but the reality experienced was different. This means that what we call objective reality never arrives in its pure form. It arrives mediated, edited, transformed into personal story. Think of vision. The colors you see do not exist outside you in the way they appear. Red, blue, and green are interpretations the brain creates from light frequencies. Sound follows the same logic. There is no music floating in the air, only vibrations of molecules that the ear translates into notes. Even touch is translation for what we call heat or texture, are electrical responses triggered by nerve endings. The entire body works as a translator, and this translator is never neutral. Once you realize this, an inevitable question arises. Is what we call reality an internal or external experience? Philosophy has wrestled with this dilemma for centuries, and modern science is beginning to confirm that the lived world is not a faithful copy of the universe, but a creation shared between organism and environment. It is as if we are in contact not with the thing itself, but with an interface designed to guide us. This interface is useful, practical. It ensures our survival. But it does not reveal the totality of what exists. A classic example is the limited perception of different species. Bees see ultraviolet patterns our eyes cannot detect. Bats build spatial maps through echoes of sounds we could never hear. This means each being inhabits a distinct reality, even while sharing the same physical space. Humans, in believing their perception is the universal measure of the real, forget they touch only a tiny fraction of what vibrates around them. By understanding this, something begins to crumble. The trust that what you see is all that exists. This crumbling should not be seen as loss, but as opening. Because if reality is not the fixed surface we thought, then there is room for new forms of perception, for modes of consciousness not yet activated. It is at this point that science and spirituality begin to converge. Both suggest that what we call common reality is only one level, not the whole. The brain, in its attempt to save energy, constantly filters information it deems irrelevant. You do not feel your own heartbeat most of the time, do not sense the friction of air on your skin every second, do not notice the hundreds of sounds your hearing is capable of capturing. This exclusion mechanism is vital, but it also creates the impression that we live in a narrow space, as if only the lit part of the stage were the whole play. If everything is filtered, conditioned, and projected, then what you call reality is largely a perceptual agreement. An agreement that can be expanded, challenged, and even dissolved in experiences that touch expanded states of consciousness. Many mystical accounts and even research in the neuroscience of meditation point in the same direction. When the filters relax, perception becomes broader, and the real ceases to be only what fits into the everyday narrative. Perhaps this is why so many seekers, philosophers, and scientists end up arriving at a similar conclusion. Reality is not static, but dynamic, not a thing, but a process, not external, but co-created. And it is from this understanding that the door opens to the deep transformation promised in this video. If science shows us that reality is shaped by internal filters, symbolic language helps touch that same truth on another level, that of experience. Because it is not enough to intellectually understand that the world is interpreted by the mind. It is necessary to feel this instability in the body itself. Think of the night sky. You look at the stars and believe you are seeing the present, but each point of light is a delayed message, traveling millions of years before reaching your eyes. What you call the celestial reality is, in fact, a portrait of something that may no longer exist. The entire universe presents itself as a projected memory, and yet it guides us, orients us, moves us. The scene you contemplate is not what is happening now, but it is still true in experience. That is the paradox. Reality can be authentic even while being partial. Another example comes from water. A river is never the same in two different moments, yet those who observe it believe they are facing a stable entity. We call that flow river, as if it was something fixed when in truth it is an uninterrupted process, a dance of currents renewing at every instant. Human reality is similar. We call self something that transforms all the time. We call world that which is in constant change. The name brings comfort, but it hides the movement. This perception can be cultivated through simple practices that require no specific beliefs, only refined attention. Close your eyes for a few seconds and feel the body. Instead of thinking of the body as a single structure, perceive it as a network of pulses, sensations that arise and disappear, waves that alternate. The body is not fixed. It is a vibrating field in permanent alteration. By noticing this, you begin to recognize that even the sense of stability is constructed. A powerful symbolic exercise consists of looking at any everyday object, a chair, a stone, a tree, and trying to perceive it not by its name, but by its presence. Once the word is removed, only raw experience remains, textures, shapes, energy. This shift suspends for an instant the brain's automatic translation and opens space for something more direct, more bare. The object ceases to be merely an object and becomes living, pulsating reality. In the mystical traditions of different cultures, this capacity to see without the filter of concepts is considered a gateway to expanded states of consciousness. Zen Buddhism, for example, insists on the practice of looking without naming. In Kabbalah, one speaks of perceiving the world as letters of a living text that updates with each breath. Shamanism sees reality as interconnected layers where each being communicates something beyond appearance. Though they start from different views, all point to the same core. Reality is not what we think of it, but something that reveals itself in the silence of interpretation. And there is a practical consequence in this experience. When you can suspend the avalanche of labels, the mind slows down, time seems to expand, and what was once ordinary gains intensity. A simple bird song may sound like a new message. The texture of a wall may awaken wonder. Contact with another person may carry unexpected depth. Reality ceases to be merely a backdrop and becomes a living stage where every detail pulses with multiple meanings. This expansion is not a mere poetic exercise, it has direct implications for the way we relate. If I perceive the other only through labels, friend, enemy, stranger, I am trapped in reduced versions of reality. But when I can suspend the filters for a moment, the possibility of genuine encounter arises, in which the other is no longer merely a function within my narrative, but a living, unpredictable, real being. The same applies to the relationship with yourself. The inner voice that repeats stories about who you are, strong, fragile, competent, insufficient, works as a filter that creates a limited inner reality. By learning to look at yourself beyond words, you begin to realize that your identity is not a fixed prison, but an open field of possibilities. This perception may be uncomfortable at first, because it dismantles certainties, but soon it becomes liberating, for it reveals that nothing is fully defined. The symbolic path, then, is not to move away from reality, but to deepen the perception of it. It is as if, by removing layers of automatic interpretation, something raw, more authentic emerges, something that has always been present but rarely noticed. Ordinary life, seen from this perspective, already contains enough mystery to awaken wonder. The extraordinary has never been elsewhere. It has always been hidden within what we call ordinary. If up to this point we have seen that reality is not fixed and that our perceptions are partial translations, the turning point happens when we realize that we are not merely spectators of this construction, we feed it all the time. Every thought that arises, every emotion cultivated, every repeated belief shapes what appears before us. Reality is not limited to something external. It responds to the way consciousness positions itself. Contemporary physics, especially in quantum mechanics, has already caused discomfort by suggesting that the act of observing alters the phenomenon observed. Experiments such as the double-slit experiment indicate that matter does not behave in a definite way until it is measured. It is as if the universe were waiting for a gaze to choose which face to present. This does not mean that we create everything from nothing, but that we actively participate in the way the real organizes itself around us. This perspective breaks a rooted pattern, believing that life happens from the outside in, like a predefined script to which we merely react. When we begin to perceive that we also project, choose, and influence reality, the narrative changes. We are not merely passengers on a moving train, we are also conductors, even if unconscious of the force we exert on the tracks. This understanding manifests itself in simple things. A state of anxiety, for example, is not only internal, it alters the way you interpret facial expressions, tones of voice, everyday events. The world seems more hostile because your body vibrates in alert. On the other hand, states of calm or confidence expand the horizon. Doors that seemed closed reveal themselves as possibilities. Reality changes not because the world itself has suddenly transformed, but because your internal frequency tunes into a different layer of it. It is at this point that the turning becomes transformative, realizing that there is not a single reality, but many latent possibilities, places responsibility and freedom in our hands. What you nurture within yourself echoes in what you perceive outside. Reality ceases to be a fixed scenario and reveals itself as a malleable field, sensitive to consciousness. For some, this revelation may sound uncomfortable, since it dismantles the idea of absolute stability. But at the same time, it is liberation. If the world is not an immutable prison, then there is room to create, reposition, and live experiences broader than those inherited by automatisms. The real is not a wall. It is a moving network which responds to the touch of attention. This turning point also explains the strength of contemplative or spiritual practices that for centuries have insisted on the importance of conscious attention. By directing the mind toward states of presence, silence, or gratitude, we are not merely changing ourselves, but tuning the reality that manifests before us. It is like changing the lens of a camera. The landscape may be the same, but the framing and clarity reveal dimensions that were previously hidden. But here lies the crucial point. This understanding is not just a concept to be admired, it is an experience that must be lived. Each time you notice the change in color in the internal and external world according to the state you are in, you are witnessing the plasticity of reality. This is more than theory, it is daily practice. And perhaps this is the true invitation of this video, not to passively accept the reduced version of the world, but to make room to recognize that the real is broader than the conditioned gaze allows to see, to question one's own beliefs, to feel the body as a field in mutation, to perceive how the internal state reorganizes the external landscape. This is the breaking of pattern that can change the way you live from now on. Now, for this turning point to become even stronger, I want to propose something to you. If this content is making sense to you, like this video and write in the comments the phrase, "My reality is opening." This simple action is not just support for the channel. It is also a symbolic act, a public record that you choose not to remain in the same old gaze. By writing, you are already beginning to reposition your consciousness, declaring that reality will no longer be seen in the same way. If the turning point has already shown us that consciousness actively participates in what we call reality, the human narrative has always sought symbols to translate this mystery. And one of the most powerful ways of understanding this movement is through stories that cross cultures and eras, carrying deep truths in archetypal language. Among them is the ancient parable of the prisoner who grows up inside a cave without knowing the outside world. For him, the shadows projected on the wall represent all that exists. His reality is made of distorted outlines, muffled sounds, and echoes, until one day, someone dares to leave and discovers that those forms were only reflections of something much greater, brighter, and vaster. When he returns to tell, he encounters resistance because those who stayed believe that nothing beyond the shadows could be real. This story is not just a philosophical metaphor, but a portrait of the human condition before the unknown. We prefer the safety of what is familiar, even if limited, rather than risking contact with a broader reality. But notice, this is not merely a distant myth. In our daily lives, we repeat this same structure. We carry beliefs, habits, and ways of perceiving the world as if they were the walls of a cave. And often we resist the possibility that reality could be greater than the version we uphold. However, just like the prisoner who glimpses the light, there is always the chance to cross the border of the known and open to the unexpected. This crossing does not happen only by an intellectual decision, it requires emotional courage. Because letting go of old forms of reality can be uncomfortable. Think of someone who spends years believing they are incapable of loving or being loved. This belief becomes their shadow, their wall. But the moment they experience a genuine encounter, when they feel seen and welcomed, reality opens irreversibly. What was once impossible becomes natural. And from then on, the old limit loses strength. In depth psychology, this dynamic is expressed by the archetype of the hero's journey. The hero departs from a familiar world, faces trials, and returns transformed, bringing a new vision not only for himself, but for the entire community. This trajectory does not describe only warriors and myths, but any human being who accepts leaving the narrow version of reality and returns expanded. The crucial point is not in defeating external monsters, but in crossing one's own internal limits. There are also more subtle narratives, like that of the artist who paints the same landscape every day, until one day, something shifts in his gaze. He realizes the scene was never the same, that the light and tones were constantly reinventing themselves. His art changes because his perception changed, and with that, reality itself renews. The artist does not discover a new place. He discovers a new way of seeing. These stories remind us that reality does not present itself in a single way to everyone. Each person in their journey discovers different passages, but all point to the same truth. We are not trapped in the shadows of the cave, nor in the narrow versions of ourselves. There is always a horizon opening beyond the known. By recognizing this symbolic pattern, we gain strength to face our own caves. When we feel afraid of change, we can remember that the initial discomfort is part of the process. Reality expands not as a distant prize, but as the inevitable consequence of a gaze that dares to open. And perhaps the most powerful thing is to understand that this expansion is not individual. Each person who awakens to a broader vision also influences those around them. The prisoner who returns from the light, the hero who comes back from the journey, the artist who reinvents his landscape, all bring a collective gift. Reality does not transform only within you, it resonates with those who connect. At this point, what seemed to be merely scientific theory or philosophical reflection gains flesh, emotion, and story. Reality is not only perceived, but lived, traversed by symbols that point in the same direction. The real is vaster than what we believed. If stories and archetypes show us that reality can expand, the practical question remains: how to bring this perception into everyday life? Because it is not enough to intellectually understand that the world is broader than our filters. It is necessary to experience this openness in the body, in the breath, in the gaze. A simple yet profound path begins with attention. Not the hurried attention that seeks to control, but the kind that allows itself to rest. Try sitting in silence and, before trying to understand anything, simply notice the flow of the breath. Air comes in and out effortlessly. Gradually, the body stabilizes and the mind finds space. In that space, the possibility arises to observe reality not as immediate narrative, but as presence. The key is to sustain observation without judgment. When a thought arises, let it pass like a cloud. When a bodily sensation appears, just acknowledge it. This exercise shifts consciousness from automatism to clarity. Little by little, you begin to perceive that reality is not only what appears as mental content, but also the silence between contents, the field where everything arises. A complementary practice consists of expanding the senses. Choose a simple environment, it could be your room or a quiet street, and allow yourself to perceive more than usual. Do not limit yourself to what you expect to find. Notice colors, shapes, movements, sounds that would normally go unnoticed. By intensifying this perception, reality ceases to be background and reveals itself as living fabric. Often, this simple openness already produces a sense of wonder similar to that reported in mystical experiences. There is also an exercise of relational perception. When talking to someone, try suspending automatic labels for a few seconds. Instead of thinking friend, colleague, family member, simply be present to the energy that arises in the interaction. Look not only at the words, but at the pauses, at the sparkle in the eyes, at the subtle gestures. In this state, the reality of the encounter expands, and the other ceases to be just a role within your narrative, becoming a living and unpredictable presence. Another fundamental point is to cultivate the practice of contemplating impermanence. Hold an object in your hands, a leaf, a stone, any item, and reflect on the process that brought it there. The leaf was born from a tree, which grew from light, water, and earth. The stone was formed over thousands of years, compressed by invisible forces. The item you hold may have crossed countries, factories, unknown hands. Suddenly, something seemingly banal reveals itself as a knot within a vast network of relations. Reality shows itself to be larger than the initial gaze allowed. This practice can also be taken inward. Close your eyes and notice a single thought. Ask yourself, where did it come from? Perhaps it is the reflection of a memory, of a word heard, of an unnoticed emotion. Gradually, you realize that no thought is isolated, all a part of a larger web. In this recognition, the mind becomes less identified with content and more open to the flow. The goal of all these practices is not to reach extraordinary states, but to perceive reality more clearly and less conditionally. It is simplicity that transforms. The act of breathing consciously, of looking without naming, of listening with presence, already profoundly alters the field of experience. Little by little, the world reveals itself as vaster, more vibrant, and more interconnected than the automatic version we use to inhabit. And perhaps most importantly, these practices do not require withdrawal from ordinary life. They can be carried out amid routine, in the pauses between tasks, in brief moments of self-contact. Because reality is not only in great moments, but in every detail that presents itself. The more we cultivate this gaze, the more we realize that transformation does not depend on external circumstances, but on the quality of the presence we offer the world. By training this openness, perception changes irreversibly. Reality ceases to be rigid and begins to be lived as process, as moving field, as dance between perception and presence. It is at this point that the promise made at the beginning begins to be fulfilled. You will no longer see the real in the same way because the very way of seeing has expanded. Throughout this journey, one thing has become clear. Reality is not the fixed stage where we act, but a mutable field that responds to gaze, to attention, and to consciousness. Each layer we unveiled revealed that we are not facing a rigid structure, but a living process pulsing inside and outside us. What seemed solid proved fluid. What seemed ordinary revealed itself extraordinary. The initial promise was fulfilled. You no longer see the world the same way. Something has shifted. The mind may still try to explain, rationalize, give form, but a part of you already knows that reality does not fit entirely into names, concepts, or even the certainties you upheld until now. The real is greater, and to feel this is enough to change the way you walk. This change does not need to be grand to be profound. It is in perceiving the texture of a moment, in recognizing the other beyond their roles, in opening space within yourself for a quieter listening. Small shifts that, when added up, forever alter the way of living. And now, if you have made it this far, I want you to write in the comments the phrase, "I choose to see reality in a new way." This way, I will know that you walked until the end of this journey with me. If this content resonated with you and you wish for more experiences like this, subscribe to the channel and allow this expansion to continue.